Okay, thank you, Dana. So I'd like to welcome everyone now to our panel session. So my name is Mark Headley. I lead the Supply Chain Integrity Initiative that's hosting this function, and as just mentioned by Dana, I'll be facilitating this panel discussion. Today's topic was inspired by a finding from a report commissioned by MLA earlier this year that explored industry experiences and issues with product integrity in the Australian red meat supply chain. One of the findings that we thought would be a good topic for discussion at this session, as certainly discussion starter, was that industry views on the need for investment in enhanced supply chain integrity systems are at odds of those of researchers and technology and service providers. So we've invited representatives from both industry and from CSIRO to discuss this topic. So we've got Lucinda Corrigan, Sonya Dominic, Ian Jenkinson, and Sky Richmond. As I introduce each panel member, we've asked each to make a short opening statement on what they see as the greatest research challenge to address industry needs related to supply chain integrity. You, the audience, will have the opportunity to ask questions of the panel via the chat function. Unfortunately, it won't be possible for people to actually speak, but that chat function was already introduced by Dana. And just a reminder, down the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little thing that says chat if you haven't found it. You click on that, there's a panel in which you'll be able to see the questions that come up on chat, and you'll also have the ability to post your own questions. After the opening statement, I'll be reading out questions to the panel members from what appears on that chat function. Okay, so what I'd encourage you to do as each of the panel members makes their opening statement, think about your questions and post them straight away. And I'll be looking through those and looking for questions we can ask the panel after we've got through that. Just as a reminder, the chat is open to everyone, and at CSIRO we value open and respectful communications. So we hope that today helps further the channels of communication between our researchers and industry, and explores both the topic in terms of the diversity in terms of opinions, in terms of what's needed from industry and researchers, but also many other issues related to enhanced supply chain integrity in the red meat industry and beyond. So to start this session, I'd first like to introduce Lucinda Corrigan. Lucinda has spent her professional life working in innovation across livestock industries. Through many roles in industry, government and academia, she's developed a deep interest in transformational research and development. Lucinda has been a director of Meat and Livestock Australia and also chaired the MLA donor company, and current roles include being director at dairy company Datagene and chair of the of the Animal Breeding and Genetics Unit at the University of New England. So Lucinda, your 2 minutes for your opening statement starts now.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll be quick. Now, first I want to show you this box, which I've loved keeping in my office. For some years, we were very keen to develop a grass-fed supply chain through ourselves and some of our clients because we're in genetics. And when we went down to pick up the strip loins, they were labelled Wagyu because they were so highly marbled. And I suppose it was just a great example of the integrity of our beef not being maintained through this small value chain we were working with. I just want to start with genetic improvement in meat quality, led by 3 CRCs from 1992 to 2012, which really transformed meat quality. And we used to sit around rooms in those early days and talk about branding. We looked at what the wine industry had done. And when the dream became a reality with Meat Standards Australia, the question then becomes who gets the benefits. I run a business where there are 4,000 cattle across a number of farms, 50,000 pieces of data on every animal through genomics. And really, we're not actually getting the benefit of all that data into the systems, whether it's animal health and welfare, whether it's quality, whatever it is. So I guess we'd like to see ways of harvesting more data out of our genomics. And I guess my first main point is, can producers share the value, the benefits? Do integrity systems enable that? Because the data shows about 60% of the spillover benefits end up with the consumer, and the rest is captured through the supply chain, with a small amount captured on farm. For most of us in SMEs, we don't own the value chain. We're just a really small player. So my second point is, I guess, many SMEs, small numbers of processors, value chains, wholesalers, food service, and then millions of customers. So you've got kind of this bottleneck that the product passes through. And my question then is, can blockchain actually capture value in a relationship to build trust? Capture all the other stuff, but can it capture a relationship? At the end of the day, storing all this data in the cloud is quite perfunctory, really. It's compliance rather than, I guess, what I'd call true innovation. Because what we want to do in our systems, especially with the Internet of Things and all these new products coming in, and I've sat on the board of Adjacents for a couple of years and I'm still involved with the company, is we want to actually improve efficiency of production rather than just reporting what we do. And finally, having read the MLA report and the hypothesis that consumers aren't necessarily going to pay more for knowing where their product comes from, the story behind the product, the green grass and the happy cows, what else is there? And I would argue that we have quite a tsunami of sort of views internationally, globally about emissions intensity and other sustainability values tied up with our product, which will increase our consumer engagement. If you look at a recent Rabobank report, they suggest that 3 things are needed: what sustainable animal production protein looks like, commercialisation driven by reward and recognition, and tools for the metrics and measuring sustainability performance. So I just currently chair the Sheep Sustainability Framework, which is developing. And I guess a lot of the things that Phil Valencia mentioned would be great for giving us reporting at a sort of an industry level, because metrics is something we're really lacking. Thank you, Mark.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Lucinda. Over next to Ian Jenkinson. Ian is a microbiologist who has, for the past 17 years, has led the Australian red meat industry's food safety research program, working with scientists in Australia to understand how to manage risks associated with meat products, control of meat hygiene, management of shelf life, and providing and maintaining consumer trust. Ian is the manager of Market Access Science and Technology at MLA. And so, Ian, your 2 minutes starts now.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I was the person who commissioned this report that Mark quoted from earlier, and I hope that everybody has been able to access it from the link, and I will just put another link to it in the chat. We set out with this report to really just to ask 2 questions and say, from a marketing perspective, from a professional marketing perspective, how do marketers look at all of these product integrity technologies that we may be able to apply? And how do you get value from that? So asking the same questions as Lucinda has asked about value and who gets the value. And the second question we asked was how supply chains can cooperate with one another to ensure that value does pass and information passes in one direction and value passes in the other direction in the supply chain. And it is a rather provocative report, but I think it's based on quite good qualitative data, and I think there's something for everybody in the report. The report demands, I think, that we answer the question about where is the value and how do we gain the value. And I just think that this is such an important matter to research. Phil has given us a very good and quick overview of how technologies can be applied. And I'm not critical of Phil, but Phil obviously didn't have time to talk about all the things that already happen that go a long way to giving consumers confidence. And so we really have to ask, where are the gaps? Where are the things that we can fill in? And bluntly, the question about who is willing to pay for it. I've been working with Ryan McAllister in a on program where we've been asking this question, and pretty much, you know, we're told, well, Australia already gets a premium in you know, in a high value product in high end supermarkets throughout the world. You know, and there's an enormous level of trust and acceptance of that product. So we have to be very thoughtful and purposeful about designing systems and finding out where we can gain value. And I think the value perhaps comes from every day, from efficiency. You know, the things that Lucinda already touched on. And again, we have to find out how we can deliver value for our businesses every day, rather than just providing an insurance policy or thinking that the consumer is going to pay. Thanks, Mark.
Good. Thank you, Ian. I'll now introduce Sonya Dominic. Sonya is an internationally recognised expert in animal breeding and genetics, and she leads the Sustainability and Welfare Group in CSIRO. Over the last 5 years, her work has focused on developing cost-effective genomic technologies and developing traits in sheep and cattle to enhance industry sustainability. Sonya, your 2 minutes starts now. You're on mute, Sonya. Common mistake, I'm afraid.
Here we go. Now, hopefully you can hear me. So it was interesting that you pulled out that particular statement that the view of industry and researchers is at odds. And there's probably more instances where that is the case than not. So it wasn't actually that surprising. But I believe that creative tension is actually required to initiate the conversation. That eventually results in innovative solutions that are actually applicable in industries. And if we would be actually in agreement at this early stage of solving this complex problem, we probably would be looking at a suboptimal solution, I believe. So as part of my opening statement, I want to make 2 points around the value proposition. So when we think about the need for supply chain integrity systems, I actually want to turn the spotlight away from the consumer back to the producer, and where value can actually be created from on-farm efforts. And that goes along with what Lucinda was saying. So currently technology is being developed to assist producers to generate data that underpin sustainability claims for their operation, and that's a non-negotiable for the red meat industry to maintain their social license and to maintain market access. So to create greater value for the industry from these on-farm efforts, we need to connect the end product so that the industry can demonstrate their clean green image throughout the whole value chain. The second point that I wanted to make is that traceability, I believe, is not a competitive advantage for a single business, but a safeguard for the whole industry. And therefore, it needs to be collaborative and coordinated industry and R&D effort to design a single system that is effectively tech-enabled and draws on multiple data streams. So these data streams can be actually collected in a number of areas for various different purposes, like, for example, genomic information, animal movements, chemical applications. But by actually bringing them together, that's I believe, where the value proposition can be formed around creating a supply chain integrity system. Thanks, Mark.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Sonya. And now over to our last panelist, Sky Richmond. Sky is a senior CSIRO commercial manager with over 15 years experience in local and global markets. She has deep experience in agriculture and spent 15 years at MLA prior to joining CSIRO. More recently, as manager of strategic partnerships at the MLA donor company while she was there. So, Sky, your 2 minutes starts now.
Thanks, Mark. I found the comments that the rest of the panelists have said are really on point. when we do research, we're looking at what the next best thing is that we need to try and solve, and the wicked problems are. And we also need to bring the users of this research along that journey with us at the right point in time, which is why we're here for this discussion today. Australia has the best traceability systems in the world at the moment, but there are other countries that are building their performance levels, and the benefits that we currently receive will maybe start to dissipate if they can become equally competitive. Think Kodak and the film industry and how they didn't survive because they were comfortable. So I think we can't stay comfortable. I think we need to make sure that we're looking for how we maintain that trust. Phil, I'm going to have to take you on. One of your comments was, do we trust farmers? Absolutely. Can we prove that we can trust our farmers? Not always. And so how do we give people confidence when something goes wrong? So now I'm going to talk about what this topic means to me. And I think it's like insurance. No one wants to talk about it until they need it. And when they need it, they either have it or they don't. And part of this research is really helping with that difficult and not so nice conversation around the insurance for the industry as a whole supply chain, and where the benefit's going to fall. The report was really poignant for me. One of the comments that it made was around trusted traceability will become a condition of trading terms. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that in certain markets. Those technical trade barriers that are being put in place that are limiting the ability for industry to deliver their product. And if that doesn't happen, everyone on that supply chain is compromised. There's a lot of work. Processing and growing and eating a piece of steak takes 3 years on average to get a really quality piece of meat to the table, and sometimes longer. So to have it lost at that final step just before it gets to the consumer is a complete waste. We've also got some grandiose goals that we're striving for as an industry. We have a carbon neutral 2030 philosophy that Lucinda brought up around that sustainability component. I'm hopeful this technology can assist with being able to identify and give accuracy around the performance measures that are in place by producers and how they're behaving on farm and throughout the supply chain, and record that. The report talks to inventory becoming a bankable asset and giving confidence that the people that provide the finances can see their assets in action as they progress through the supply chain and have confidence that the investments that they've lent are going to be made available to the industry. So there should be a benefit to industry to be able to invest and get outcomes. But also, if there's less wastage, there's an increase in profitability. So one of the really interesting things in the report that's probably underdone is that opportunity around shelf life. And Ian's passionate about this, so I'd let him talk to it in more detail. But having that shelf life extended for different markets changes the game completely around the supply chain. What if we didn't have to ship it via air miles? What happens there from a carbon neutrality perspective? What if we put it on a boat and it takes a little longer, but we can maintain the trust and the provenance and the assurance for the consumer that it was kept at the right chilled levels to extend that shelf life? So they're the points that I observed in this report, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk about it in more detail. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Sky. And just remind all the audience that now's a good time. If you've got any questions, please start providing them through the chat function. I noticed that a number of these initial addresses were talking about who gets the value, and part of it that Ian mentioned is and in fact Lucinda as well, was how much of that value, for instance, flows back to the producers themselves. So first question I'm just going to ask the panel is, what can we do in concrete steps in terms of increasing the value back to the producers themselves? And maybe Ian Jenkinson, if I could start with you.
I think it's a tricky question, Mark, and it's one that I ask myself quite often, and I suspect from Lucinda's comments, she and others have put their mind to it for a long time and perhaps not come up with answers either. I really wonder when we have really disaggregated supply chains and we don't have really strong relationships, whether we're as an industry we're losing and missing out. The issue of where is value created and how do you get it to come back. The economists do equilibrium models that say when it comes to equilibrium, it does come back to the farm. But I don't think the lived reality supports that idea, at least in our lifetimes. So I think I think we have to think in terms of business model innovation and how we make sure that everybody gets a fair share of the benefits.
And Lucinda, did you want to add any comments to that question as well? You've
Well,
worked across academia as well as the industry and government in between. So,
I mean, in many ways, I'd say things are better than they've ever been in terms of more sophisticated supply chains. So if I look at some of the relationships we have and our clients have with whether it's JBS or T's or some of the smaller to develop a sort of trusting relationship about, you know, whatever it is in terms of product value. And, you know, that has changed markedly in the last 30 years. This whole metric on relationship, how strong is it? And having watched, you know, failures of supply chains like King Island beef, and, you know, for instance, you know, producers would sell their cattle for a couple of cents more to some other processor rather than the guy on the island. You know, that tells you it's elusive. It is elusive, and finding ways to develop trusting is sort of the it's the holy. I don't have a lot of answers, but I do think things have improved a lot.
Great. Okay. So
Mark,
I'm going to. Yes, Ian.
Mark, if I could just come in again, if people want to have a look at some of the case studies in the McKenna report, they'll see sort of smallish producers who are getting their product through to markets, and I suspect are therefore benefiting from that, and those supply chains probably do need the kinds of technologies and do get rewarded for the kinds of technologies that we're discussing today. At least that's my suspicion. So I think we need to think about how these technologies are applied with niche suppliers, perhaps rather than the big end of town.
And the podcast is great, Ian. I listened to the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good case study.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Pat. I'll go over to there's some questions coming in through the chat function, so I'll start going through some of those now as well. So, in fact, the first one is, do you think that the industry is missing the point? The reason we are working with partners on animal monitoring is to collect continuous extensive data on animal behaviours and environments for production optimisation, yield and cost being the main business driver. As the data is extensive supply chain integrity data and compliance information is desired and necessary byproduct. I'll throw this one to Skye, given your mix of extensive industry experience as well as more recently in academia.
Thanks very much, Mark. I think what's really interesting when you're working with industry is being and with research, and part of my passion about the role that I have is the ability to work to translate the messaging that's coming through. So I think that if industry is missing the point, then we haven't done our job in communicating correctly what the information is that they need to take out of this. So I think it's a really valuable question, Tony, because I think it falls both ways. We need to be able to communicate and articulate what the benefit is, but we also need to listen to industry and understand what their problems are that we're seeking to solve. And if there's secondary benefits from what we're focused on fixing, then we should highlight that. And then the other thing is, I think sometimes with industry, we've got incredibly talented, innovative industry partners who are very good at self-solving. But because they've tried and failed on certain areas, they have a level of concern when they think it's impossible to be solved. And so if you inadvertently preach that something can be solved and there's a disbelief because it's tried and failed previously, you really need to be ready to provide that proof. And what I like about the presentations today is they're They are on a farm, they are with real animals. We do have the proof, and we want to show people that this is actually happening. Even though we have to simulate some of the information later on because of COVID, we're actually doing this in a real environment. And I think that's really important for industry to have faith that it's not just smoke and mirrors. And that would be my response to that one.
Great. Okay, that's it. Thanks, Sky. And a question that relates to the early one I asked, actually. So Lucinda was talking about genetic improvements, but who really gets the benefits there? I'd like to throw to Sonya. Who are you saying from a research perspective is getting the benefit of the research that's being undertaken?
I think the point that was made in the comment from Tony is very much the data is the key aspect of the whole work, and how we pull this data together to actually create the major value out of that resource. It's like, I mean, the data that's being collected on farm, and that's where it goes back to earlier question too, how do you actually create value for the producer? So there's so much data created on farm for a particular purpose, to also use that for supply chain integrity, but also for improving management systems. There's a number of areas where, if it's aggregated in the right way, then there's multiple benefits that flow from it. And just as an example, I can probably run a little advertisement for the biological origin session in stream 1. Just the example of genomics. There are already extensive genotyping efforts in the stud industry, but if there could be a mechanism, say an animal is genotyped once in its life, and it's used for, that information is used for traceability and for management decisions, creates huge, much larger benefit out of that single cost that was paid for that single genotype.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Sonya. Another question on the chat function from Ryan is that looking at the need for cross commodity, cross jurisdiction in traceability systems. Comments, this pops up time and again. Given this is a meat focused workshop, I wonder what the other panelists have to say about the need or not for collaboration, and in particular on what agendas is collaboration the most immediate need or opportunity. And Lucinda, if I could ask you to address that one.
Look, I was very interested, Mark, in the presentation by Lockie Graham on the podcast, the MLA podcast with the report, where he talked about with KPMG and how it was applicable across the food industry and not just red meat. So I think that looks very positive to me. Look, you would hope that any of these systems that are robust will work across multiple industries. Obviously, the value chains in meat are more complicated, I think, than in vegetables or some of our other products. So I do, I think if we can learn it in red meat, it'll be applicable more broadly.
Great. Okay. And question for Ian, and this touches upon some of the material that was in the report as well. Where do you see the return on investment for investment enhanced in traceability systems? Certainly the report noted it may not be so much integrity as well as market access or productivity or other things, but in your view for the red meat industry, where is the return on investment to be had?
Yeah, I think Tony White, in asking his question, has really hit on the issue, is that we need to be able to improve our quality or maintain our quality and our yield and reduce costs. And a lot of these technologies, the technologies that Phil was talking about, need to be applied to do that. And that's what I mean by used every day. Lucinda has referenced a couple of times the Lockie Graham example, and they're seeing value for their business not just in providing the insurance policy that, as Sky mentioned, but it's about working capital. It's time to cash. It's those business aspects, and I think we can't lose sight of those. That's how our businesses will make money every day, and we have to concentrate on how that's done. And as Sonya said, if it's about getting that genetic information and using it in a number of ways, and that makes the whole thing cost effective. And and in essence, if it gives you the biological provenance, the ability to check stuff for free, because you're already getting a lot of value from the data, then that's smart. And I think that's the challenge, to go right back to your opening question, is that we have to look at how we can bring all of this together and apply it, because we've got one industry that needs to apply multiple technologies, will choose technologies, needs to bring them together in a good way. And the McKenna report makes quite a point of that a lot of this is about brand Australia, and if we can do this for red meat, and we can do it for wine, if we can do it for horticultural products, which actually do have their own really complicated issues. Listen to when you find out about it, they're different complicated issues. But if we can bring that together, then again we have strength for Australia and cost-effective applications for users. And I think that's the really big challenge for the mission. Good on you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. We're all counting on you.
Okay, and thank you for that, Ian. We're out of time now, but I'd like to thank the entire panel, Lucinda, Ian, Sonya, and Sky, for your time, and for the audience also for your questions. We hope this discussion contributes to closing the gap between research and industry, and certainly encourage the audience to further engage with CSIRO with contacts being provided in the presentations. I'll now hand back to Dana, who will wrap up the session and explain how the subsequent parallel sessions will work.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to share my screen, and then we'll give everyone a little under 10 minutes break. Thanks, everyone. Look, just to sort of summarise what we'd like you to keep in mind, and Ryan mentioned these and he posted these in chat. We've got the CSIRO Agri-Food exports work ramping up, and what we really would like you to do as you're listening to the talks this afternoon, because the research and technology that's presented, they will be at different levels of readiness. So we really do want to hear from you so that you can help shape where those technologies go. And so please, use that chat function. And also have a think about, as Ryan said, where could these technologies be repurposed? We've chosen red meat as a use case in this particular work that we've done and that we're showcasing today. Red meat is the use case for most of the technologies that you'll see. It's a very complex supply system, and so, we see the technologies being transferable to other products and other supply chains. So please give some thought to that as well. Very quickly again, here's the agenda. Where you see a little farmyard, barnyard, I've just highlighted the technologies that Phil quickly touched on. So if you want to learn more about those technologies, you can see those with the icon there. Stay in this link if the next talk you want to join is biological origin or anything on the left-hand side of the agenda. Close this link and jump into web link 2 if you want to start off with the classification of cattle behaviours talk. As I said, you can jump in and out anytime. We will do our best to stick to time so that you don't miss anything. Please engage with chat as well. You will see this slide at the front of most talks, and you saw this with Phil's presentation, and people will highlight where in the chain they're talking at the beginning of their presentation so that it sets the context for you and you understand where in the chain the technology plays a role. So the last thing I'll say is this is the last time we'll all be together in the one stream. So I just wanted to let you know that you should feel free to contact any of your CSIRO contacts, any of the researchers that you hear from today, or myself, or Sky Richmond as our business development lead. Please continue to use the Twitter handle if you're on Twitter. We have an external web page where we will post recordings of these presentations. Give us a couple of days to get all that together, and I will email you out that link as soon as we've uploaded those.